So welcome. This is going to be the first part of the course, which is Linux. So we'll just start up. So first, we're going to talk about a little bit about Linux and a little bit of history. It's not really important, but it's definitely good to know where a lot of these things came from. So initially, Linux was created in 1969 by Bell Labs, and it wasn't called Linux at the time. It was called Unix OS. Bell Labs developed this OS to essentially manage their systems for programming and a bunch of other things. So they decided to make an OS and they called it Unix. Eventually in the 1970s, that OS started growing. And at the time it was open source. Eventually, Bell Labs started to get really greedy and change it from open source to more of a commercialized sale of Unix. So they were selling Unix to IBM and a bunch of other companies. So some people didn't like that. And these companies, such as in the 1980s, companies such as IBM, Solaris, HP, started developing their own version of Unix. Eventually, in the mid to late 1980s, a project came into fruition called the GNU project. And this new project gave rise to what we know now as the modern Linux kernel. And essentially the Linux kernel is based off the original Unix OS. Essentially the way they got around the commercialized Unix is that they rewrote everything from the original Unix into in C, but they made that open source. So essentially, a bunch of developers decided, hey, we want to make this open source. Well, let's write everything again from base. And then that's what eventually Linux came to be. So what exactly is Linux? So Linux is a computer operating system. So an operating system consists of software that manages your computer and lets you run applications. So kind of like Windows or Mac OS, these are all operating systems that are very popular in consumers, right? Odds are is that you probably have a Windows computer, right? Or a Mac. Linux is a OS that it's not very common when you look at the market share of consumer OSs, but it's very common in more commercial applications. A lot of companies run their applications in Linux, right? They would rather choose Linux than running an application in Windows Server or in some other form. Mac OS isn't very common in servers, right? So a lot of these companies use Linux to run their applications. So with that said, let's dive a little bit further. So what are some features of Linux, right? So like I said, Linux is open source. And because it is open source, it allows people to change a lot of these components in Linux. So for example, you have a lot of people making their own distributions of Linux. So you might be wondering, well, what exactly is a Linux distribution? Well, the fact that it's open source, people can change and swap or add things to the Linux OS. So these Linux OSs start changing. And because these Linux OSs are changing, right, you start getting deviations of these OS. So you start getting, flavors of Linux. So you start getting something called, Ubuntu. That's a deviation of Linux. There's one called Red Hat, Fedora, Debian. These are all different flavors of Linux. And the reason why they came to be is because it's open source policy. People decided that maybe they wanted an OS that would target a specific thing that they wanted to do, right? So the OS was changed, and that's the the nice part about being open source. Another thing too is that if there's an issue with the OS, let's say there's an issue with a malware where there's a vulnerability. Well, the fact that it's open source allows people to go in, make the change, and essentially tell the community, hey, there's an issue. I wrote a patch. If a software was not open source, you'd be at the mercy of the company maintaining that software. So that's that's the real nice thing about Linux. A lot of these Linux OSs are open source, and the community itself is involved in the development of the OS. So again, what is Linux? It's derived from Unix. Linux is an open source operating system. And some distributions that are rather popular are Fedora, Ubuntu, and Red Hat. You don't need to know exactly what are the differences between these, but I'll just give you a little summary. Essentially, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is a Linux version that was made more for commercial distributions, for servers and workstations. So essentially, there is a company that dedicates themselves to maintaining a commercial version of Linux. So let's say you had a company that required some form of security standards, and these security standards needed to be maintained. Well, the company would rather buy Linux from a company that makes sure that those security standards are met. So that's where Red Hat Linux comes into play, right? You get a commercialized version of Linux that's maintained by a company called Red Hat. With that said, there are two other versions that came from Red Hat, Fedora, and another one that isn't listed here is called CentOS. CentOS, so essentially Fedora is more a experimental cutting edge version of Red Hat. It's more a essentially if this OS has the newest versions, right? The newest thing. So let's say a new button that was added. It's not going to be added to the commercial version automatically. It's going to be added to a more experimental OS first, which is Fedora, and then eventually perhaps the commercialized version will eventually have that button, for example. So CentOS, Fedora, they all came from Red Hat. And then last we have Debian, right? Debian, did not come from Fedora, but it's another version of OS, and that's where Ubuntu comes from. Debian, a bunch of these distributions that are more common. When you think of Linux, you probably think of Ubuntu, right? Debian is typically the most common one, common flavor that you would mess with. So yeah, so with that said, I have a little link here about these distributions that are pretty interesting, and let's see if this actually loads. I'll put this link in chat actually, so everybody can look at this. This is a where's chat? There we go. Let me put this in chat. This is a picture of essentially of all the Linux distributions and where they all come from. So we look here, Fedora was created, and from Fedora, you have all these different versions of Linux, right? Of all the different flavors that came from it. Then let's say we scroll down, we have another one, Red Hat. Well, Red Hat, there are all these versions that came from Red Hat. So if you see here, Linux has so many different flavors that have come from all these different versions, right? All these different versions are able to be created because it's open source. So that's really interesting if y'all want to take a look at that. You can probably find Apple in there, like Mac OS, because Mac OS is a deviation of the original Unix. Mac OS was created from this other version of Linux called BD. Let me see, I'm trying to remember. BSD, Berkeley Software Distribution. Apple, and so Mac OS is based off the Berkeley software distribution, and that was essentially the University of California, Berkeley was also making their own version of Linux, and Mac OS is based off some parts of that distribution. So cool. So that's a little bit of the history, and now let's dive deep in what is now Linux. So I'm assuming everybody already has their emulator in their computer, right? I'm assuming you have Ubuntu. So let's talk about, when you open Ubuntu up, let's see what we have. So first off, when you open Ubuntu, you probably have Ubuntu at, Ubuntu or something. So this first part is the user, and this second part is the name of your system, right? In this case, my user is called Adrian Delby, and my system is Pop! OS. I am running Linux as my main OS. So the Linux distribution that I'm running is Pop! OS, right? So here, this is your user and this Pop! OS. You'll probably have Ubuntu and Ubuntu. That's what I think. Now that you know what that is, when you open up the terminal, you know that the terminal is ready to type in there. When you see, when you see this line here with, this user and the computer name, that's when you know you're ready to type. So you can just type a bunch of random stuff if you like, and you're ready to type in commands. Before we do that, I want to talk about a couple more things here. Let's talk about what this $sign means. So this $sign, I guess before the $sign, let me talk about what this sign here, this tilde sign means. This tells you that this gives you your current working directory. So when you open up terminal, the terminal usually opens up in something called your home directory. And we're going to talk about directories in a little bit and what exactly is a directory. But if you want to think about it, a directory is essentially a file somewhere in your computer. So if we're all used to Windows, right? You click your file manager and you can click through a bunch of files and you're navigating your system. Well, how Linux works is Linux is just a tree of files, right? A file leads to another file, or excuse me, a folder leads to another folder, right? You have you can go through these different directories. So when you open up Linux, the first file or the first folder, excuse me, that it opens is something called your home directory, and this is just your user's home base, if you want to call it. So we'll talk about this command in a little bit, ls. But ls would show you the items that are present in your home directory. Another thing too so this tells you your current working directory, and we'll see what I mean by current working directory in a little bit. Another thing that I want to add is this $sign. What does this $sign mean? I'm about to go into that. So there's a question in chat. I have a £sign and not a $sign. Is that different? So let me talk about what this next sign means, the $sign. So a $sign. So if you have a £sign, which there's a question in chat, right? If you have a £sign rather than a $sign, it means that terminal session has super user permissions. So what is super user? Well, Adrian LB is a regular user. And let's say I wanted to run some commands so excuse me, there's a question in chat. How can we access Linux? I think you should be able, if you have Windows, if you search up Ubuntu in your computer, if you have already gone through the process of downloading and installing, it should pop up. So if you haven't, you won't be able to see Ubuntu. Anyways, what I was saying is that this is Adrian LB is a regular user. And let's say I wanted to run a command that was hidden, that I needed to do something administrator-wise. So for example, if I needed to remove a user or I needed to add a user. Well, a regular user cannot run these commands. So what the creators of Linux decided to do was, well, there's going to be a user that has administrator permissions, right? This user is called the root user. So when you see a £sign here, it's telling you that the current user that you're logged in has these hidden permissions, right? You have these administrator permissions. Just to show you what I'm talking about, you don't have to worry about what this command does for now. I'm just going to show you. Let's see, su-u. See if this works. Oh, we're not going to mess with that. I was trying to log into my super user, but we'll worry about that in a little bit. So going back to this, a regular user has a $sign, right? This is telling me that the current user that I'm logged in as in my terminal session is a regular user with just regular permissions. If you log in and you see a pound sign, that is telling me that this current session of terminal, right, of this terminal session, you're logged in as a user that has these heightened administrator permissions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you do have to be a little bit more careful about the things you do. If you have heightened permissions and you delete a file where you're not supposed to, you can crash your entire computer. I've messed with my computer and I've accidentally deleted drivers for my screen, for my monitor, and I wasn't able to use my computer, right? I wasn't able to look at my screen because I gave myself these hidden permissions and I deleted something that I wasn't supposed to. So when you see a pound mark, that means you're a hidden permission user. When you see a regular $sign, that means that you are in typically in a regular user. So let's type in some random thing here. Let's type in some random stuff. And when I press enter, it tells me that a command was not found, right? And here, this is called, the shell, and I'm typing commands in my shell. When I type this garbage, Linux is going to check, hey, is this a command? And because this wasn't a command, it tells me a command was not found, right? So there are commands that exist, and we're going to go over some of these commands. One thing that I want to introduce to is moving around with the cursor. So if I type in a couple more things in here, as commands not found, I want to introduce a concept of history. So with your arrow keys, you can move up and down. And if you move up and down, you're able to see your history. So if I move up once, I see my previous item. If I move up again, I see my, it's my second to last item. So moving up and down shows you your history. If I go up, and let's say I want to access, I want to go to the beginning of my line. Well, I can use my left and right arrows. I can go to my left, and I'll eventually go to the front, and I could go to my right, by hitting the right arrow. There are some other shortcuts that we can use. For example, Control A would take you to the beginning. That's another shortcut that you can use. But you can use these arrows. So I'm just introducing the concept of moving around, right? You can use the arrows to move left and right. Or if you use up and down, you can move around in your history. So for example, I'm seeing all my history that I've done in the past. So with that said, so that's how you move around. If you wanted to exit your terminal session, you can type in exit, and exit will close your terminal session. So that closes your terminal session. Let me bring up a new terminal session in here. Let me make this a little bit bigger for y'all. So cool, right? That's a little preview of our terminal session. Before we start going into our commands, I want to talk about the file structure. And let's see if I can give actually a new share here. Let me see a whiteboard. Can y'all see this whiteboard?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Cool. So Linux has a hierarchical directory structure, and it works as a inverted tree. So what do I mean by this? So if I have, so let's think of a tree, right? You have a tree, has a base, and a tree goes like this, and it has a bunch of branches, right? That's how a typical tree is. In Linux, the file structure is more of an inverted tree, where your base file, right? Your base is called root, right? If you have a tree, right? Let's say the tree is inverted, right? This is how Linux is structured in something called an inverted tree, in a file system tree. And what do I mean by inverted? So let me clear this. Let's do this. Clear. Actually, let me do black because I don't know. Maybe some of you are colorblind. Cool. Am I drop? There we go. So what do I mean by inverted file system? So when you're dealing with Linux, the base file, right, the topmost layer of your file system tree is called your root directory. Your root directory. And then from your root directory, you have a bunch of other files that come from there. So from your root directory, let me actually delete this. From your root directory, you have your user directory. And from your user directory, you have a directory called documents, and perhaps you have a directory called, photos. Perhaps you have another directory called, I don't know, books. And let's say under books, you have another folder called, I don't know, let's say, reading. It's called read. And under read, you have a bunch of other files, right? So let's see what happened here. So if you think about a tree, about an inverted tree, right? If this is the base, from that base, you start seeing other branches, right? So in Linux, the file system mimics an inverted tree. The very topmost directory, your first directory ever, right? There's nothing that comes before this root directory. The topmost directory is called your root directory. There is no directory, there's no folder, right? There's no folder, and directory mean the same thing. Essentially, I'm going to refer to these as directories now. There is no directory that comes before root. This is your base. If you think about a tree, this is the base of your tree. From that root directory, you can navigate through different parts of your system. So from here, from root directory, you can navigate to a folder called user. Then you can navigate to documents. You can navigate to photos, right? From your root directory, let's say you have another file folder called I don't know. There's another one called etc. Right? You say you have a garbage directory or something. So from this root directory, that's where everything stems from. So root directory is the topmost directory in your file system. So with that said, does that make sense? When I mean root directory, root is the topmost item in your structure, in your file structure. And how Linux works is that Linux moves around in these directories. So there's a directory for everything. So what's the difference between Windows and Linux is that, let's say you connect a USB drive. In Linux, when you connect a USB drive, that USB drive is mounted in a specific folder, right? In Windows, that USB drive is read as a separate CD drive. So rather than adding it, let's say, to the documents folder, right? Let's say your USB drives are, every time you insert a USB drive, it's added to documents, let's say. In Windows, it's a completely new hard disk. So let's say if this is your hard disk, a USB drive would be another hard disk over here. It'd be separate. So that's the beauty of Linux, is that Linux sees everything as directories. And when you connect some form of hardware, for example, a CD drive or even a USB stick, these USB sticks are read in some point in the directory, and it's added in some directory. So I just want to introduce the concept of the root directory and how these files are organized. So now let's go into these a little bit more. So let me try to exit out of this. So stop share. And let's go back to the folder. So here, let's go back to
Lost audio.
Yeah, my bad. I accidentally hit mute. My bad. Okay. So the first command that I want to go over is pwd. And pwd stands for print working directory. So let's type it in. pwd shows you where you are currently at in your file structure, right? So it shows you the current location in your file system that you are currently in. So when you open terminal and you type pwd, it's going to show you your location of your user's home directory. And remember, this is my user Adrian Del B, and the home base, if you want to say, for Adrian Del B, is this this file path. In order to get to the home directory, you have to navigate from root to home to Adrian Del B, right? So pwd shows you your current working directory. Now, let's actually look at our root directory. Actually, let me see. Actually, we'll look into that in a little bit. So PWD just shows you where you are currently at in your file structure, and that's really nice to know. Sometimes you want to know where you're at, and you might be lost. Or you want to navigate to somewhere. PWD shows you your current path, and we'll talk about this path in a little bit. Another command. So I'm going to talk about several commands, and then we're going to go into them and use them together. The next command that I want to talk about is ls. So PWD shows you where you're currently at in your file structure, but let's say you want to see what's inside the current directory that you're working in. Then remember, a directory essentially is like a folder. So if you want to see what's inside your directory, ls it shows you the contents of your current directory. So if you type in ls, odds are that you might not have anything yet. You know, if you type in ls, you might not have anything listed in your directory, so you might not see anything. But in my computer, since I have, since I use this computer every day, right? This computer, my home directory comes with a bunch of folders that are pre-made. That's why I have all these different, I have, desktop documents. I have a bunch of other stuff in here. So when you type ls, it shows you the contents of your current directory. So this is really nice. So every time you go into a directory and you want to see what's inside, you type in ls and it shows you everything that's in it. There are more uses for ls. I can just introduce them now. You don't have to worry about them because we're going to go into in depth with them later. But let's say you wanted to see everything inside your current directory, even things that might be hidden to the user. You could say -a and it shows you all these extra stuff. You don't have to worry about that now, but I'm trying to introduce the concept of that these commands have extra attributes, and we'll look into these extra attributes later. So ls again shows you what the current working directory has. So we've seen where you're currently at in your file system, and we've seen how you can view your directory. Well, or view the contents of your directory. Well, that's nice, right? But that doesn't do much. You should be able, how do you actually move around in your computer? Well, to move around in your computer, there is a command called cd. And cd stands for change directory. This command allows you to change your location in your terminal session. So let's say I wanted to navigate, this is my ls. For my current working directory, I can navigate into any of these documents, into any of these directories. Let's say I wanted to navigate into a directory called documents. I can type in cd documents, right? And another thing, a cool shortcut that I want to show you now is the tab key. In Linux, when you press tab, it autofills if there's an item that meets these requirements. So for example, if I type in doc, and I press tab, it autofills documents. But if I type in D and I auto tab, and if I tab, it doesn't know what to autocomplete to, because there are 3 items that start with D: desktop, documents, and downloads. If I put an O and I try to hit tab, it still doesn't know what to autocomplete to, because there's documents and downloads, right? They both start with DO. It's not until I type in DOC and I press tab, it's able to autofill, right? Autocomplete my request. So when I typed in cd documents and I press enter, it takes me now into my documents folder. And if I type pwd, I see now that my current working directory, I went from Adrian Del B into a directory called documents, right? So I now moved into a new file. So we've now, we use cd to move into a file. Well, how do we move back? How do we go back one directory? So we can go back one directory by doing cd ... These dots is it's a shortcut that is kept in Linux that tells the computer to access your previous directory. So when you do cd ... it's going to tell Linux, hey, go back one. It's going to go, go up one directory. So if you remember our tree, right? If your tree is here, you go down one item. If you want to go back, it's going to traverse one up, right? It's going to go up one file. So when you do cd dot dot, two dots is used to refer to the directory one hierarchy level above the current one. So if I do cd dot dot, what's the file? What's the directory that is one above my documents directory? Well, the directory that is one above is Adrian Del B. Why? My current directory is documents, and one above is Adrian Del B. So if I do cd dot dot, it takes me back. So if you see here, right, it used to be tilde documents. Now it's just the tilde sign. And if I type in pwd, it shows me that I've navigated, I used to be in documents, and now I've navigated one up. So now my current working directory where I'm at right now is Adrian Del B, where it used to be documents. Another thing that you can do with cd is the dot. cd dot pretty much just, it stands for the current directory that you are in. If you do cd dot, it doesn't do anything. Why? Because the dot stands as used to refer to the current directory. So what's happening here? So if cd is used to move around to different directories, if you're saying move around to my current directory, Linux is just like, well, I'm already here. I'm not going to move anywhere, right? Because the dot stands for your current directory. So let's recap here. cd documents, or cd whatever, or let's say you wanted to go into, desktop this time, right? cd desktop will take you there. It'll go from where you're currently at into your desktop, right? So let's navigate back into documents. Right, cd desktop will take you into a new directory. So you have now moved from one directory into another. And if I type pwd, it shows me that I went from Adrian Del B into a directory called documents. We learned that you could go back one. You can go back a directory by doing cd dot dot. If you do cd dot dot, it moves up one. It moves up one in your hierarchical tree. If you do cd dot refers to your current, this dot refers to your current working directory. So if you do cd dot, it's saying move to my current working directory. And because you're already in your current working directory, it's not going to move anywhere because you are already there. So that's cd. Now let's talk about, so if you want to clear your screen, do you always capitalize directory first letter? No. So that's a question in chat. Do we always have to capitalize directory of the first letter of a directory? No. The reason why mine are caps is because this is the way that they're created, and the Linux, the OS that I have creates these directories with capitals. If you were to make a directory, I'll see the address. Yeah, give me a second. If you make a new directory, I really recommend you use lowercase just because it's easier to type, but there is no convention that says you have to use a capital. But, if you see documents with capital D, and we'll talk about this next command that I'm using in a little bit, and I type, documents with capital D, right? Documents and documents are two different things. So these files and directories are case sensitive, right? But you're not required to type these directories with capitals. If you want, you can do that, but it's not something that's required. Idris, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm so sorry to interrupt early. Can we ask question anytime, or
no, at any time? I would rather you ask me questions now than at the end, because you were more likely than not, you're thinking about that question the whole time, and I would rather you ask it right now. So yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, about moving between the directory is not really clear, because I tried to use that command on my Ubuntu right now. It's saying the command not found or something invalid or something like that. I tried to use the cd dot and cd document to change the directory to document, right? It says the command not found.
The cd command?
Yeah. cd dot. Yeah, command not found.
Command not found.
Yes,
Can you type in we're gonna go over this one command in just this next slide, but can you type in man? Oh wait, there's no manual cd. Can you do man ls? Can you do ls at all?
Yeah, yeah. LS is cool.
ls works. Okay.
Yeah, LS is fine.
Adrian?
Somebody call me?
Yes, it's Isaac.
Oh, Isaac, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a CD space and then dot dot. He's probably doing close to the CD. Shouldn't there be a space there?
Oh yeah, I mean, are you doing it without the space, Iris?
It's CD space dot dot.
Yeah, try that. CD space dot dot.
Yes, it works.
It works. Okay, so yeah, I mean,
CD space. Okay, so
that's a good.
okay, CD space.
Bring that up. Yeah, I mean, spaces are, I guess, I mean, they're very important. So if you see here, CD dot dot, Linux doesn't know that you're saying this is your command, and you're gonna run these parameters with that command. So So yeah.
So what about the changing directory to document? Yeah, CD document doesn't work. Then the tab key, the tab 2. You said something about tab earlier. The CD, if you want to fill up the document like DOC, then tab doesn't work.
Well, I don't know if you have documents, a documents folder in your directory.
Yeah, I do. I do.
You do. So if you type in ls, you see that there's documents.
Okay. You only see
So yeah, so if you can only navigate to directories that exist where you're currently at. So if I do an ls, these are the directories that are in my breath where I'm currently at. So for example, if I want to navigate into a directory that's not here. So for example, if I had, assuming, let's say, I want to navigate to a directory called books. Well, there is no directory called books here, right? And if I do cd books, it tells me that there is no file or directory called books, right? So if you're getting this, that means that the thing that you're trying to go into is not present, right? So you have to first make sure, hey, is it present in my current working directory? I do an ls and I see the items that are present, right? And if the documents is not there, then you cannot access that item, or you cannot go into that item because that item does not exist.
All right. Gotcha.
Cool.
Thank you.
So the basic commands that we're learning now, should we prioritize memorizing them for the success in the workforce? I think the fact that these things that I'm teaching you right now are basic commands for you to even move around in Linux. Like you cannot navigate to documents, you cannot navigate to another folder without learning CD, or you will not be able to visualize these or see the contents of a directory without knowing ls. So if you're going to learn anything, I would just, if you're going to learn anything, learn CD and ls, because that's the most basic thing that you need to know, is how to move around and how to see the contents of your directory. So CD and ls, CD stands for change directory, and ls stands for list the items. There's a question, can we create a directory? Yes, you can, but we're going to go over that in a little bit. What's the difference between bash and base? So ignore this. This is something I have I have something called Anaconda, which is a Python environment in my computer, and Python, and this just tells me that it's using the base Python image in my terminal. So don't worry about base. You will not have this. This is something more that I have. What is bash? So bash is the kernel of the shell, of your terminal shell, right? So this terminal is based off some underlying kernel. So every time you type a command, you say ls. ls is interpreted and it refers to the kernel, right? So there are different kernels that exist. So bash stands for born again shell, right? There are different shells that exist in Linux. So in this case, Ubuntu uses the bash shell, which is called the born again shell. There are other shells called Korn, KORN. There are other shells, that's the two that I have off the top of my head. There's another shell called SH, that's the original shell that was created in Unix. So we will talk about, what these shells in a little bit. But yeah, so bash and base they're not related at all. Base is something that I have. Don't worry about that. Cool. So let's visit our root directory now. So remember, our root directory is the very base. It's the base of our file tree. So let's visit our root directory. You can visit your root directory by going cd /. So before I do that, actually, let me type in my current working directory. And then when I type in cd /, this / is a shortcut that will take you to your very base of your file tree. When I do cd /, I see that tilde now changed to this /. And when I type in pwd, I see that instead of being at home, Adrian LB, I'm now at this first /. So with that said, right, if this / is representing root, what does this mean, right? How do we read this? So if this is root, we're saying from your root, we navigated to home, and from home, we navigated to Adrian LB. That's what this means now. So when I type when I do cd /, it takes me to your root directory. And here, when you have just this empty /, it's telling me that you are in your root directory. When I do an ls, I see all these files in here. And these are these sensitive files that I was talking about, where if you make a change to one of these files and you have administrative permissions and you delete something, odds are that you're going to mess up your computer, because these files are rather sensitive. But here, ls, it shows me everything. This is these are the files that are in my root directory. So let's say I wanted to navigate back into Adrian LB from my root directory. So from my root directory, I see that in order to go back into Adrian LB, I have to go to home, and then I have to go to Adrian LB. So let's work with this. So from root, I have to go into home. So I do cd home, and I press enter. And if you see now, my current directory now says that I'm at home. I went from root, this is root, and now my current directory is home. And if I type a pwd, it shows me that I'm currently at home. And then let's do an ls just to see what we have. Here, you have all the users that are available in your computer. I have a bunch of users. You will not have all these users. You'll probably have one. In this case, I want to navigate into Adrian LB. So I'm in my current directory is home, and now I want to navigate into the home directory of Adrian LB, right? That's my user's home directory. So how do I go into Adrian LB? I say cd Adrian LB, right? I type in AD, and I press tab for autocomplete. And when I press tab and I do a pwd, I see that I went from root to home Adrian LB. So now I'm in my Adrian LB folder. But why is it that? Yeah. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah. So the issue I've been having has been I've been looking at that root directory anytime I enter ls. So I just try to follow you back with a home ls, but it's not doing anything for me. So it's not giving me what my directories are.
Okay. So if anybody's on the same, so if you do an ls and nothing's there, right? Is that true?
Yes.
Right. And you can clear your screen with Control L. Just another tip. Control L clears your screen. So if you do an ls and nothing's there, and if you type pwd and you only see this /, that means that you're probably in your root directory. What do you see when you type in pwd?
So I'm seeing the / home right now.
/ home.
Correct.
Okay. So you are essentially here, So when I type pwd, I'm now in my / home. And in my case, in my computer, I have all these different users. Just for the sake of, moving around these documents, I'm going to introduce a command that, we learn later, but, might as well introduce it now. if you want to make a directory, so for those that don't have a file to move around in, let's make a directory just so you have a way to move, so you have a directory to go into and move around from. So to make a directory, you mkdir. Mkdir stands for make directory, and then you type in the name. So if you're in your home directory here, just give it a new, like, let's say if your user's Ubuntu, right? If it's here like this, my user Adrian LB. So your user might be Ubuntu. So here, just do make directory Ubuntu. Oh, that's probably. Cannot create a directory called, okay. Sample home. Sudo, okay. So sudo Ubuntu. Oh, excuse me. Sudo make directory Ubuntu. There you go. Okay, so the reason why, so make directory, mkdir makes a directory. And because I'm editing my home, this home directory, I need hidden permissions to make a change. So to make a change with hidden permissions, there's a command called sudo, and I'll explain what sudo does later in this course. But essentially, sudo allows you to mimic your root, your hidden administrative user. So we call the user root user. So by doing sudo make directory, you're elevating your permissions to administrator. And since you have elevated your permissions to administrator, now when you do sudo make directory Ubuntu, you're able to make that directory. When you do sudo, it's probably going to prompt you for a password. So if it's prompting you for a password and you haven't set one yet, run this command, passwd. Passwd will prompt you to set a new password for your current user that you logged in. So remember that password, type in, test or the, I don't know, test password, or just type in password or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. So, once you've set your password, you use sudo make directory and just call, just make it what you want. You can call this, test directory or Ubuntu, whatever you want it to call. And this is just for the people that perhaps don't have a directory to move around in. But it's not something that you need. I just want you to have a directory to move around in. So were you able to make that just so we could move on?
I had the pound sign on mine, so it didn't really deny me. So I didn't do the sudo.
Okay, perfect. So so ignore this. I'm removing this extra file, this extra directory in here. So cool. So let's go back into where we were at. Actually, we're gonna take a break in about 3 minutes, but let me just wrap up what we just learned. So we were talking about our root directory, and like we said, our root directory is the very base of our file tree. Our root directory is given by the /. This / is known as the root directory. If I wanted to navigate into my root directory, I can do cd /, and it takes me to my root directory. And when I see here, I see now that my current directory where I'm in is /. When I type pwd, I see that my directory is /. When I type in an ls, I see that I have all these base files that are used in my system. If I want to navigate back into my user's home directory, right? My user is Adrian LB. I can either type in cd home, right? Because Adrian LB exists in home and then Adrian LB, right? Or I could just type in cd. If I type in cd by itself, it takes me to my user's home directory. My user is Adrian LB. So when I just type in cd by itself, cd will take me to my user's home directory. So I went from root, right? I went from root, and when I typed in CD, it now it took me to my users Adrian LB's home directory. In your case, you might not have home Adrian LB or home Ubuntu. Your home directory would probably just be /home, right? So when you type in CD by itself, it takes you to your user's home directory. Another thing that I want to talk about now. So if you saw here, when I navigated to root, it showed me that my current location was /. Here, when I went into home, it's /home. Well, why is it that when I navigate into my user's home directory, this sign, this tilde sign, is present, not / and why is it that this tilde sign is present and not home / Adrian LB? Well, this / or this tilde sign here represents this. It's essentially, if you want to call it an alias, right? When you type in tilde, it takes you, it represents your user's home directory. So it's like a shorthand notation. So rather than having /home / Adrian LB here, your user's home directory is represented by this tilde. The root directory is represented by this /. So, for example, let's say I want to go back into my root directory. I can do CD /, and now I'm in my root directory again. How do I go back into my home directory? I can do CD by itself, and that will take me to my home directory. Or I can do CD tilde, right? The tilde sign. And since the tilde sign represents my user's home directory, it takes you to your home directory. So when I do CD tilde, I see now that I've navigated from root, from my root directory in my computer to my user's home directory. So we'll dissect this in a little bit. There's a question in chat. What does too many arguments notation mean? You probably have, if you do CD and you have like a bunch of other stuff in here, it just means that this CD command probably only takes in one argument, and you added more than the amount that the command requires. So I know that CD only requires one item, right? In this case, it's when you CD and you give the location, right? You give the directory that you want to go into. If you type in more than one thing, Linux doesn't know what to do with the second item. So that was the question. What do too many arguments notation mean? The next question is, how can I undo the pound back to the $ axis? So if you're in the pound axis, you can probably do exit. You just do exit, and if you're in a super user, that means it will exit that user and go back into a regular user. But I think everybody probably has a pound sign, because I'm assuming they have hidden administrative privileges. Next question was, are argument and command the same thing? So no. So this command, this is a command, CD, right? These are commands these are CD, ls, pwd. These are commands that exist in Linux, right? These are keywords that, when typed, they do a specific function. These keywords have specific inputs. For example, to use CD, CD requires, either nothing, or it requires one item, right? It requires a directory. So to use CD, you would type in CD and the directory that you want to go into. When you type in PWD, PWD perhaps doesn't require anything, right? If I type in PWD, it just works by itself. But if I type PWD, documents, perhaps, documents, it still prints out PWD, but it doesn't do anything with that documents, because odds are that PWD does not require any more arguments. And here we're going to go into something called the manual page in a little bit, but let's take a break. Let's take a break of a couple minutes. Let's call it let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back. So let's come back at whatever hour it is in your time, hour 10, a minute 10 of your time. So it's 7:04 for me. Let's come back at 7:10, or if you're at Eastern time, 8:10, whatever.
Roger that.
So let's take about a 5 to 6 minute break, and then we'll come back. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask me now. Yeah, I'll be here. So let's come back now. It's
So,
7.
so I got an observation, okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to let you know, like, some of us are using MacBook terminal, so the kind of signs are kind of a little bit different, but everything is working perfect, just like the instruction is going on. Okay?
Okay,
You get
so
what I'm saying?
everything works for you, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
everything works for me, but except the sign, because I'm like, I'm on Mac Pro terminal, so the dollar sign, I'm not getting that. So I'm getting like a percentage sign, stuff like that, but all of that instruction is working perfect for me.
Yeah, the only time where it's going to be different for Mac is when we are creating users. When we create a user on a system, it's not the same thing for Mac. I think that's the biggest difference that we have for Linux right now. But for most of the course, you should be fine using a Mac.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Cool. So let's come back to this and let's begin. So we were talking about our root directory. So again, if you want to clear your screen, you can type in clear and it will clear your screen. Or you can do the shortcut of doing Control L. Control L will just clear your screen, right? So it's a nifty thing to know. If you're typing in a bunch of stuff, it's good to know how to exactly clear your stuff. So clearing is Control L, or you can type in clear. So with that said, let's go back to what we were doing. So we just spoke about what exactly is our root directory. Our root directory is, we can navigate to our root directory by doing CD /. And now if we think about our tree, a tree has a base, and from our base, it goes up to different branches. If we think about it in our file structure is an inverted tree, right? The very base of our file structure is a directory called root. And from your root, that gives way to all the different directories in your computer. So when you type in CD /, it takes you to that very base of your file structure. So the very base is given by this / here. This / alone by itself tells you that you're currently in your root directory. And you could also double check and do pwd. And pwd shows you your current working directory. And when it shows you your current working directory, and right now your current working directory is just this. This shows you that you are currently there. Let's say you want to navigate back to your user's home directory. Well, I know that my user, Adrian Delby's home directory, is located under home. And then once you're in home, you can go into Adrian Delby. There are different ways you can do this. You could do CD home, let's do an ls, and then you can do a CD Adrian Delby. And now I'm in my user's home directory. And if I do a pwd, I see that I'm now under, I went from root into home, and then from home, I went into a directory called Adrian Delby. So you could do it that way. Let's navigate back to our root. I do a pwd, let's do an ls. Let's say I want to go back to my user's home directory, right? I can, like I said, you can do CD home and type in Adrian Delby, right, if you like. Or you can just type in CD by itself, and CD by itself will take you to your user's home directory. So you'll not be wondering, well, why is it that what is this tilde sign? And like I said, this tilde sign represents your home directory. It's a shortcut, a shorthand notation to your that represents your it represents your home directory, your user's home directory. So when you see this tilde sign, it's a shortcut. It just tells you you are currently in your home directory. If I navigate, let's say if I do an ls, let's say I do an ls and I see there's a directory called documents. I can do cd documents, right? And what do we observe here? Well, I see that from my home directory, I navigated into documents. So now my file path is whatever my home directory is, documents. When I do pwd, I see that, you know, the full path of where I'm currently at in my computer is /home /agent lb /documents. So, you know, this is different from, oh, excuse me, this is different from this, right? You know, we don't see all this extra stuff in this line. Why is that? Because this represents this. Like I said, this is shorthand notation for the path to go into your user's home directory. PWD shows you the path that you need to take starting from root. So PWD, you know, it says starting from root, in order to go into documents, you have to go to home, you have to go through agent LB, and once you're in agent LB, you go into documents. So PWD shows you your current working directory based off, you know, starting from your root directory, right? Any questions with this root directory, and you know, what is this tilde sign, and perhaps, you know, what does it represent?
No, sir.
Yeah, I'm a bit, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm a bit unclear about the tilde sign. So when I put mine in, it takes me back to the root directory, and then I type ls and nothing comes up. So do I have to create a home folder?
So if you do cd tilde and you type in enter, what does it do for you?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. If you do a pwd, what does it show?
It just shows a /root.
/root. So odds are is that when you type in cd tilde, that is the user that you're currently logged in as is probably root. And when you type in tilde and when you type in cd in the tilde sign, it's taking you to that user's home directory, which happens to be the /root folder. That's what that's telling you, right? Because cd tilde takes you to the user's home directory. And when you type in pwd, it shows you the whole path, right? Your path is going to be different from my path, right? Odds are that you might not have home, and you know, you won't have agent LB, right? Because your user is different from mine. So it's looking like your user is probably the root user. And you can do this check. Type in who am I for me. Who am I is a command that shows you the user that you are currently logged in as. So when you type in that, what does it say?
It says a root, so I'm logged in as a root.
It says root, right? So with that said, it's like you are currently logged in as your root directory, you're currently logged in as your root user. That's what that means, right? Okay. So that's why you probably have the # and not the $, right? Because your # represents your root user. So
gotcha.
Right.
Well, when I have the / opposed to the tilde, then I'm able to go to the home and I'm able to go to the subfiles, to the subdirectories.
Yeah. So I mean, if you do like cd /, you can still go further down, right?
Gotcha.
Right. Like, because right now you're probably something like, you know, you're in /root, you know, or something like that, right? That's the current location that you're in, right? Because you're currently in your root user's home directory. But there's so not to be confused, right? So there's the root user and there's the root directory. The root directory is, I'm talking about the files, right? Your file structure. The root user is a user that has administrative permissions. So right now you are logged in as a user called root, and that user has heightened administrative privileges. It is not the same thing as the root directory. The root directory is just the base of your file tree, That's what that means.
Gotcha. Understood. Thank you.
Perfect. So we can go to our home directory by doing cd tilde, right? Because cd tilde represents our home directory. Another cool thing that I want to introduce too is, let me go back to my home directory. Let me navigate into documents. If you do cd and then this dash, this shortcut is used to go back to whatever directory you were just in. So for example, I was just in my home directory and I navigated into documents. I can do cd dash and it takes me back into the previous directory that I was in, right? It takes me back to my home directory because that's where I was at. Let me do a little bit something a little bit more drastic. Let's say from my home directory, I navigated into my root. So how do I navigate into root? I can do cd. Go ahead.
So does that mean that cd dash is the same as cd dot dot?
No. So cd dot dot takes you from your current directory. It takes you one up, right? It takes you to the directory above, right? Okay. So when I navigated into documents, I was in my home and I navigated one down and I went into documents. If I do cd dot dot, it would go up one, right? And it will take me back to whatever file or to whatever directory is above it. But cd dash is different. Cd dash takes you to the directory that you were just in, right? Sometimes it happens to be that it happens to be the directory that is above you, but it could be that it's a directory somewhere else. So which is what I'm about to do. So I'm in my home directory right now. Just to show you, I'm going to type in pwd. How do I navigate into my root directory? I do cd / and if I type in pwd, I am now in my root directory. Let's say I wanted to go back to my home directory, or let's say I wanted to go back to the directory that I was previously in, right? I can use the cd dash. cd dash takes you to the directory that you were previously in. So if I do cd dash, it takes me back to the directory that I was in before I did that change. So I used to be in my home directory, and then I went into root. And because I called cd dash, it takes me back to the directory that I was in before it takes me to the directory that I was in before. And the directory that I was in before is the home directory. Let me change it a little bit more. Let's say that I navigate first into documents and I type in pwd, right? I'm currently in my documents folder. Let's say I need to do something in my root directory. I navigate into my root directory, I do cd / and now I'm in my root directory. Let's say I do a bunch of stuff and now I want to go back to the directory that I was in before I moved. Well, I can do cd dash and it takes me back to the directory that I was in. What was the directory that I was previously in? The directory that I was previously in was my documents directory. That is found under home, Adrian Delby, documents. So when I do cd dash, it takes me back to the directory that I was previously in. So when I press enter, it takes me back to documents, right? So so there's a question in chat. If you type in cd triple dot, does it also take So okay, the question was changed. So if you type in cd dot dot, does that also take you back to documents? No. So what is cd dot dot used for? Cd dot dot takes you back. It takes you up one in your tree. And then remember a tree, right? You start here, you go down one. Let's say here, I was in my directory, in my home directory, and I navigated into documents. So I went one level deep in my directory. When I do cd dot dot, it takes me one level above, right? It's right next to it. It takes me one level above that directory that you're in. What does cd dash do? cd dash doesn't take you one above. It could take you 5 above. It could take you 5 forward, 6 forward. It takes you to the directory that you were in before you changed. So in this case, I was in my documents folder. Then I navigated into my root, right? So I went 3 levels in, right? I went 3 levels up, and let's say I wanted to go back to where I was currently at, CD dash took me 3 levels in, right? Because I went from root, so I went from documents to root, and now when I do CD dash, it takes me back to my documents. If I would have done, let's say if I was in documents and I do CD dot dot, it would have taken me up 1, you know, and if I do CD dot dot again, it takes me up 1 and up 1. CD dot dot only takes you 1 level up. CD dash takes you to the directory that you were previously in. So it could be that the directory that you were previously in was the directory above you. That's why if you do CD dash, it could be that it takes you 1 up as well. But you know, don't confuse it that, you know, if you want to go up 1, you just do CD dash. That is wrong. CD dash only takes you to the directory that you were just in. So cool. Let me see if there's anything else I want to talk about with CD. Let's go forward and let's see if something comes up. So let's move on a little bit, and you know, we'll start using CD a little bit more, and something will probably come up in my head. So we've gone over a couple commands now. We've gone over ls, we've gone over pwd and cd. Well, what if you don't know? What if you don't know how to use these commands? Well, luckily in Linux, there's a thing called man, right? And man is short for manual. So there's a manual that comes with Linux, and you could search for a command in this manual. So how do you use this? You can do man. Let me go to my home directory. You can do man, and then the command that you want to search for. So in this case, let me search for the ls command. So I do man ls, and I press enter, and it gives me a screen, and it shows me, you know, ls, and it tells me a little synopsis. You know, what does it do? It lists the directory contents. It gives me a little description, and it shows me all the different flags that I can add into my command. So what are flags? So we've been using ls by itself, but ls has other things that you can do with them. So you can add these flags that allow you to, you know, extend the functionality of ls. So let's take a look at one of these flags. So if you do ls-a, it shows you, it tells ls to not ignore things that start with a period in the beginning. If you do an ls dash, there's another one here, L. Where's L? If you use ls-l, it shows you the long list format of your directories, right? Of the contents of that directory. So all these commands, you know, or typically most of them have flags that you can add, and these are flags that extend the functionality of a command. It also tells you, you know, how you can use this. So for example, you know, ls, and you have an option, you know, these are the options, like all the different flags that you add. And perhaps you could also give it a file structure, right? You could give it a specific directory. So let's work with this, right? So we've been just doing ls on its own. Let's say, you know, we saw that man, you know, if we do man ls, we see that there's a flag called -a, right? And it shows you that it says do not ignore entries starting with period. So we could extend the functionality of ls by doing ls-a. You know, and it gives us, you know, shows us everything that's listed inside my directory that is not hidden. Or excuse me, it shows me everything in my directory, even the things that are hidden. So, and we'll talk about, well, what does it mean to be hidden, right? That's something that we'll look into in a little bit. But I'm showing you that these commands have these flags. Another thing that I think is important, I think that I should get out of the way with ls, is that, you know, we've been using ls just by itself, and ls shows me the contents of my current working directory. You can use a lot of these commands by specifying a file path. So what do I mean by that? Let's say that I wanted to list the contents of my documents directory. You know, right? If I wanted to list the contents of my documents directory, you know, I could, you know, navigate to documents, you know, and then once I'm in documents, I could do ls, right? And I could see all the stuff that is inside my documents directory. Well, that could be rather cumbersome, right? You know, what if I don't want to navigate into that? Well, I can give the path that will take me to documents, right? So I can say, you know, how do I go into documents? right? I can say ls, and I say, and I type in, documents. Let's see, is it doing it? Is it doing it? ls / let's do this. Does this work? Oh, okay, I know why it wasn't autofilling, because I had do. So if you do, let's do an ls first to see what we have. Let's say you want to list the contents of documents. I can give a file path to ls, and ls will navigate down my file tree into the directory that I give it. So in this case, I'm giving ls the directory of documents. So if I do ls documents, it prints out the contents of my documents directory without moving from where I'm at. I'm still in my current directory. Let's say that I wanted to go even further with this. Let's say under documents, I have a directory called IBT, right? I can say ls, I want to see the contents of IBT Learning. I can say ls documents IBT Learning, right? From where I'm currently at, I can navigate into documents, and then from documents, I can navigate into a directory called IBT Learning. And here, I'm printing out the contents that is inside a directory called IBT Learning. And this is a concept that we're going to use a lot in Linux. And it's giving a path to something. So, what's a path? Well, if you do PWD, it shows you the path to your current working directory. Here, I gave ls a path to navigate to. I gave ls a path to my IBT Learning directory. It's pretty much saying navigate to documents, and then once you're in documents, navigate into IBT Learning. We'll go into this in a little bit when we talk about the a relative path and absolute path. But that's just, I want to introduce this concept of, you don't have to navigate into something to view it, right? You could use a path to get there. And that's what makes Linux really powerful. If you know a path of something, you could, from where I'm at, let's say that, from my chair, it's like going to Paris, doing something, and then coming back and never actually moving. As long as I know the path, I can just move around. So going back to this screen right here, man shows you the manual for something. So we saw ls, right? If we do man pwd, for example, and it shows me the man page for pwd. I press Q to quit. So I type that again. It tells me H for help or Q to quit. So you press Q and Q will quit. So man is useful in showing you what exactly a function does and all the flags that are available for that specific function. So with that said, let's do this directory together, or let's do this exercise together. Find the current directory that you are in. So let's get some interactions in chat. What command shows me the current directory that I'm in? Okay. Let's get a couple more people in there. Okay. Yeah, so it seems, PWD. PWD shows you your current working directory. So if I type in PWD, it shows me that I'm under home, Adrian Delby. Perfect. If you type in PWD on your end, it's probably going to be different, right? It'll show you like home Ubuntu or something. I don't know. Cool. So that shows me my working directory. Number 2, list the contents of the current directory that you are in. So what command do we use to list stuff? Right.
ls,
right? ls is used to show the items inside a directory. Perfect. Now, number 3, write the command that will take me to my root directory. What command? Write the command that will take me to the root directory. It's okay. Let's get a couple more people in there. Okay. Let's get a couple more. So cool, right? So we're getting a couple mixed answers in there, but let's talk about this. So to move around in your file structure, we can use CD. CD is used to change directories, right? But we want to go into our root directory. So what symbol represents our root directory, right? the / symbol represents a root directory. So knowing that, how do I navigate into my root directory? I do cd /. Why? Because the / represents my root directory. And in order to navigate into my root directory, I do cd /, and that takes me into my root directory. Perfect, right? So now I'm in my root directory. How do I go back into my home directory? There are different ways to do this. So pick which one you like. How do I go back into my home directory?
CD home.
Okay, so we get CD home, people saying home, people saying CD. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about this, right? If you type in CD by itself, CD by itself will take you to your home directory. By itself alone will take you to your home directory, which, that's fine, that works. What's another way to go into your home directory? Another way to go into your home directory is CD ~. What does the tilde stand for? The tilde stands for the path to your user's home directory. So when you type in CD ~, it takes you into your user's home directory. So when you type in CD ~, and I press enter, I see now that I'm under my Agent LB's, user's home directory. Now, let me go back to root. It could be, some people wrote CD home. It could be that your home directory is actually home, right? Like from your root directory to go into your user's home directory, it could be just use CD home, but that doesn't take you to your home directory. So if I were to do that, if I go here and I do CD home, sure, I've navigated into a directory called home, but I'm not under my user's home directory. So CD home, it moves you into into a directory called home, but it does not take you into your user's home directory. It could be also that your user's home directory could also be home. It could be that in your system, that's the case. But a command for everyone that will take you into your user's home directory is CD by itself or CD ~, and that will take you into your user's home directory. How is this different from doing CD .. right? CD .. moves you one back, right? So if you're in your home directory, it goes up one. It goes a directory above. So what do I mean by directory above? When I type in pwd, it shows me my current working directory. So let me ask you this: in my path, what directory is above my current working directory? So let's type that in chat. Using this path, what directory is above? So somebody said home. Brandon, you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm basically trying to understand the 1 + 1 = 2 of this, right? So if I'm looking at CD .. If I look at it like an elevator, like I'm on an elevator, the first floor, CD .. will take me to floor number 2 or to the basement, like one above or one below, correct? Versus like CD -, if I was on the 7th floor, it would take me back to whatever floor I came from, which would be like floor number 1. I understand that properly?
Yeah, so using your analogy, let's say that you're in floor number 5. If you do CD .. it'll take you to, assuming that your root is represented by the lobby of the floor of the building that you're in, right? That's the most basic level, the most base level. Assuming going with that analogy, let's say you're in floor number 5 and you do CD .. CD .. will take you one floor below, right? It'll take you from 4 to 5, right? CD dash will take you to whatever floor you were just previously in. So let's say that you went from lobby to floor 5. If you do CD dash, it'll take you back to the lobby. It won't take you to floor 4. It'll take you back to the floor that you just came from. In this case, you just came from the lobby floor. Does that make sense with your analogy?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Okay, thank you. Yep, that makes perfect sense.
Perfect. So the question was, if I go up one directory, if I go into a directory up, like one up, what's the directory that is above agent LB? It is the home directory. So if I do cd ... and I do a pwd, I see now that I'm currently at home, right? Also, I can see that I'm home by this file path right here. You know, agent LB right here was the current directory that I was in. I go up one, and now I'm currently in my home directory. So cd ... takes you one above, right? It takes you one step closer to your root directory. That's what happens. So cool. Now,
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what's the difference between the root directory and the user home directory?
What's the difference between what and what? Excuse me.
The root directory.
Oh, the root directory and the home directory.
And the user home, yes.
Okay. So a computer, in order for a computer to run, it needs to have a bunch of files and stored somewhere, right? You know, the kernel files, the files for your monitor, the files for your keyboard, you know, all these other stuff, right? So Linux needs to organize it in such a way. So Linux organizes these files, you know, starting somewhere from root, right? So it's like, hey, from root, you know, we have a bunch of files that, you know, that are organized in such a way that, you know, you can go into, let's say, you know, system files, you can go into files for your monitor, you can go into this, right? So Linux needs to decide, well, there are files that are system-based, and then there are files that pertain to a user. So Linux needs to divide, well, where are my users kept? And typically a user is kept under /home, and then under /home, you have the home for each user. So every time you make a user, you find a user in /home. So I guess I'm probably confusing you here, but essentially every user that you make has their own dedicated space, right? So agent LB has their own home directory, right? Every user has their own home base, right? So if I were to make, let's say if I were to make my user agent LB, I have my documents, I have my photos, I have my you know, my downloads. If I were to make another user, you think it's right that I should share the same files with another user? Well, not necessarily, right? You know, that's you know, that would be wrong, right? Why should another user have access to my downloads, my files, my everything, right? So these users are split up. So every user should have their own home directory. Now, so does that concept of home directories make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so every user has their own home directory because every user has their own files. Now, what is root, right? Well, root is just essentially the base of your file tree, right? Things need to be organized in such a way, and it just happens to be that, you know, to make sense of, you know, your file system, you know, everything needs to start at a certain point, right? So it's kind of like I said, like the analogy, right? If you want to go to the 21st floor of a building, you have to start at the lobby, and once you're at the lobby, you have to navigate. You go up the elevator to the floor that you want. So in this case, the root directory is just, you know, the home camp essentially of where everything starts. And from there, you go into different areas. Does that make sense? Hi, Brandon, I see your raised hand. I'll call on you right now. Does that make sense?
Okay, so the root directory would be the floor one, which is the floor, the primary floor. And the home directory would be like the home for the second floor, third floor. Each floor has a proper home, right?
So if let me show you here. If I do cd / and I do an ls, this is my lobby floor, right? This is the lobby of my building, right? My building from here on out, you know, if I want to go to a different floor, I always start from my lobby. So my root directory is the topmost file or the topmost directory in my entire computer. There's nothing comes before it. If I do a cd ... and root, it doesn't take me anywhere because there's nothing that comes before root. So root is the root directory is the most base location in your computer.
Think about a root of a.
And then from there, right, that's where you start navigating to different points, right? From your root, you can navigate into, the file, the directory that contains your users. You can navigate to the directory that has your, your BIOS settings. You navigate to your screen settings, right? You start navigating into different areas. So yeah, does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Cool. Brandon, you had a question?
Well, no, you basically explained it. You know what I'm saying? I guess I was trying to understand the basis of it, that 1 + 1 = 2 again. So it's like, I guess root is step one. You can't go anywhere or do anything until you created that root. And then step two is the home that you'll create for yourself afterwards. Is that kind of what I need to understand?
Exactly, yeah. So like to go anywhere, like you have to go from root into something, into something, into something. So that's why when you say you type cd and you're at home and you type pwd, well, in order to get to your user's home directory, you have to go from root into home. And once you're at home, you go into agent LB, right? So you have to step, you have to go into different files, right? So so you always start at root. That's what happens. That makes sense? We're all clear on that?
Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions on that? Okay. So this last one. So as I said, change into your home directory. You could do cd, and that takes you to your home directory, or you can do cd. You can do cd tilde, and that takes you to your home directory, right? And now number 5, let's look at the man page for the command touch. So how do we use man? We could say man, and then we type in touch. And what happens here? It opens up an instruction manual for a command called touch. Cool. How do we exit this manual? We just press Q and it exits that manual.
Yeah. Man touch.
So
I can't hear you. I think somebody's mic is unmuted.
Yeah, let me see. There you go. Okay. So that said, let's move forward now and let's start making this. Let's go into managing files. So let's make an empty file. So ignore this right now. I'm going to navigate into a directory where I do all my stuff in here. I'm just navigating into my lecture 1 directory. Okay, so let's look at our next command. So we looked at pwd, that shows us our working directory. We learned cd, that is used to navigate around our file system. And we learned ls, right? ls shows us our current items. Well, let's start working with our system now. Let's make a file. We can make an empty file by using the command called touch. You can use touch by saying touch and then the name of the file that you want to make, right? This is used to make an empty file without or a file without any content. So, what's the useful thing about this? If you just want to create a file and not necessarily populate it with any information, touch is convenient, right? Let's say, you just want to have a file there, you just say touch and then that name. So let's use touch to make an empty file. So just to show you what I have in here, I do an ls, I have my PowerPoint, I have some notes in here, and I have internal txt. Let's make a file called, test.txt. I can do, I might have to make this a little bit touch. Let me call this test.txt. When I press enter and I do an ls, I see now that initially I only had a couple items in here, and now when I did touch test.txt, I see that test.txt has been created. So touch allows you to make a file without specifying the contents of an item. Another thing you could do in touch is you could give touch several parameters, so or several file names. So I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. Oh, did I crash? My terminal wasn't working. Give me a second here to navigate back into. So cool. So using touch, so let me go ahead and make this bigger. Using touch, I could say touch and then a new file name. So let me go ahead and remove a file. We're going to talk about remove in a little bit, but let's say I wanted to make a file called test.txt. I could do touch test.txt, and it makes a new file that is called test.txt. Another thing that you can do with touch is create multiple files at the same time. So let's say you had a file called, sample_1 txt, and then perhaps, sample2 txt. You could specify, a bunch of files if you like, sample3 txt. You press enter, and I do an ls. I see now that I see sample1, sample2, sample3. So touch, given a bunch of files, allows you to create these files, right? And you just list them. Another cool thing that you can do with touch, a little bit more advanced, is that using touch, you can create a range of files. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you wanted to create files with, let's call them, let's make another more files from let's make files from sample 4 to 10. So we could do we could type in sample 4 txt, then sample 5 txt, or you could tell Linux, like, hey, touch sample, and we're going to give it a range. We could say sample underscore, and we'd say starting from 4 to 10, make these files. So what's going to happen here is going to make a file called sample 4 txt, sample 5 txt, sample 6 txt, 7, 8, 9, 10. When I press enter, I see now that I've kind of blown up my directory here, and now I have a bunch of txt files. So what happened here? Essentially, I gave touch an argument that said create a txt called sample, and here I gave it a range. I'm telling Linux to create these txt files with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if you see here, sample 4 was created, sample 5, sample 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that's a cool way to quickly make files if you like. You could give a range of numbers, and it'll make them. I think you can also do this with characters. So let's say sample A through D, perhaps. Let's see if this works. What do we have here? Yeah, so same thing, right? So sample A, sample B, sample C, sample D. So that's a cool way to remove a bunch of, or excuse me, to make a bunch of txt files, really quickly. Let me remove all these files now. Sample. I'm just going to do this. So what did I just do there? We'll talk about this command in a little bit, but remove, when you want to remove an item, you type in rm, and here -r stands for recursive, and I did wildcard.txt. So what does this do? It finds any item that ends in txt, and it it matches any character that came before it. So because I had a bunch of sample 1, 2, 3 ABC, but they all ended in .txt, it found all the files that ended with .txt and it deleted them. So that's a cool little trick, but we'll go into that. There's a question in chat. How do you undo a file creation? Let's say you accidentally created one. There's no way to undo something. If you delete an item, it's gone. If you make an item, well, you're able to remove that item, but once that item is gone, there's no way to undo that specific command. So be careful. If you delete a file, that's it. There's another question later in another session. Can you help me get around? Okay, perfect. Yeah, I can help you out, Brandon.
Adrian, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
These are touch commands that we're running. Are they supposed to be, this is not working for me. Is it supposed to be working on my end or no?
Yeah, you should, everybody should have access to, to touch. So if you do touch, let's say sample txt, does it not create a file called sample txt? Touch space sample txt.
Let me see. Nope, there's permission denied.
Okay, so you're probably in your root directory. That's what happened. The directory that you're currently in requires it requires hidden permissions to make a file in that directory. So do this for me. Do cd by itself, and it'll take you back to your home directory. There's another. So there's questions in chat. I'll answer those right now. So you're in your home directory now. Can you do touch in there?
Touch sample txt, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm still in my, I'm not sure if it was created, but I'm still in my my root.
You're still in your root?
It's a tilde sign and the money sign.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so at that point, type in ls to see the contents of that directory.
Gotcha. Okay, yes, it looks like it was created. Sample test.txt space text.
Yep, so the reason why that was happening is that you were probably in your root directory and you were trying to make a file in your root directory. The root directory, or some of these directories, are protected. And in order to make a change in these directories, such as deleting an item or making an item inside that directory, it requires these heightened privileges. And in order to do that, you need to either one, be logged in as root, or two, temporarily elevate your permissions by using sudo, right? In this case, since you just typed in touch without one of these two things, it says permissions denied. So that's why that's why I asked where you at, and when you typed in cd, it took you back to your home directory, which is a safe, and you call it safe haven, right? It's a space just for your user, and then at that point, you shouldn't be able to, or you should be able to do whatever you want in that directory. You should be able to make an item, delete an item, without elevating your permissions at that point.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me answer some questions in chat here. How do you undo file creation? So that's already answered that one. Must all directory files be as txt file? No. There is, you could call this whatever you want. You could say, touch, you call this IBT. And, I just created a file called IBT. So you could call that whatever you like, whatever extension, if that makes sense. But, I just write .txt because, if I were to copy it over into, let's say like a USB drive, I know it's a TXT file. So, I mean, no, you don't, it doesn't need to be .txt. You could also perhaps make, touch. There's another file structure file that we're going to go into later in this course. For example, you could say program.sh, and I just made a new file called program.sh. You call it whatever you like. When creating files, is it required to have the underscore before numbering the files being created? So the reason why I'm adding underscores between these files is because I'm used to writing underscores when to replace a space. Because let's say that I want to make a new file, and let's say I want to make a file called Adrian space Del Bosque, right? Let's say this is one file. If I do this, well, what happens? Instead of getting one file, I get 3 separate files. I get Adrian Del Bosque rather than getting Adrian Del Bosque as one. In order to get around that, I believe you have to do touch, and then you have to specify Adrian Del Bosque txt like this, I believe. And now, if you want to have spaces, you have to wrap them around in single quotes if you want to have spaces. That's why when typing these things out, I do an underscore, because it's easier to manage your files when things are in underscores. So let's, for example, I can do touch, Adrian underscore Del underscore, Bosque .txt. And now let's say I wanted to, mess around with this item. I can just I just type in Adrian and then underscore, and it's just easier to manage. It's just because it's underscore. So it's more of a stylistic preference, but I do prefer that if you're gonna add spaces, I would rather you don't. I would rather you keep files with underscores. And obviously that's not that might not be the case for a lot of things. Like, for example, this Linux PowerPoint is IBT Intro to Linux. There's no underscores there. I believe it doesn't have underscores. Oh no, it does have. Okay, I probably changed this to underscores. So originally the file was probably without underscores. So I would just try to, if you're gonna add a space, put it underscore. Save yourself some hassle. That's what I would say. So let's do this exercise before we wrap up. So let's create a file called ibt.txt. So how do we make a file? We can make an empty file using touch. So we do touch ibt.txt. And when we do an ls, let's find ibt.txt in here. We see that ibt.txt has been made. Boom, there you go. So now you have made a file called ibt.txt that's empty, and touch makes an empty file. Cool. So with that said, I'm not going to go into these next parts. We could stop here. Any questions that you have for me at this point? Just let them rip, I guess.
Yes, sir. Quick question. Will this be uploaded on the dashboard? So
yes, the lecture will be uploaded on the dashboard, and I think the PowerPoint later on the dashboard.
Yeah, correct.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm assuming for Saturday, it'll be uploaded on Sunday as well, right?
Now, we usually try to do it the same day.
Okay.
Yeah, usually the same day.
Okay, cool. Because I won't be able to make it on Saturdays, but Tuesday and Thursdays, I could definitely make it.
No worries.
Perfect. As long as you can make it, some of them, that's important. Perfect. Any other questions for me?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I wanted to know if you guys let us know what we're going to do before the class, because I didn't have Ubuntu and all of that ready, so I wasn't sure if you guys let us know ahead of time that we have to.
So you're saying a way to know when something like the Slack channel is what you're saying? You didn't have Ubuntu set up? Is that what you said?
Yes, I don't. It seemed like everybody was ready with Ubuntu to follow you at the same time, but I wasn't. So I just wanted to know if I should get prepared prior to the class. Or
yep. I see what you mean. I think there is a Slack channel that everybody is it should be added to. If you're not, I believe God's Power should help you out with that. And that's where
I can't really see your name. Your name says Cisan, so I can't really tell who's
talking.
Cedric.
Let me.
Cedric.
Yes.
Right, Cedric. So when you
part of the Slack the channel, but I don't
So
know. I saw any instruction about it. So
I can't hear the question.
for whatever reason, Cedric, your audio is poor. Can you type, please? Yeah.
oh, okay.
Godspire, Hans is asking for the link for the class dashboard. Maybe you could.
Yeah, I'm gonna send that over to you guys again. Well, it's already in the chat box, but I'll send it over again. No worries.
I have a question. Well,
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
Not for the class. What's gonna be like for the schedule for the like Thursday and Saturday? So how are we gonna know what we're gonna do on those days?
Typically how the class is structured is around 2 weeks of Linux and around 2 weeks of Python. We don't have a set, I mean, I have the lectures that we're going to teach, but we don't have like a set, time schedule. I guess it's really dependent on, the number of questions and the pace that we do. But roughly it's about 2 weeks of Linux and around 2 weeks of Python. So,
and Hans, you've got the curriculum, right? Because I did send that over to you via email. I could drop that in the Slack as well, just so you everyone's got access. And to answer Patrick's question, I'm going to drop the slides as well. Usually we put the slide in the first video, but I'm going to drop the slide on the Slack channel as well, so you guys can have access to it. And so Fabrice, good question as well. I think if I send you the curriculum as well, you can kind of just see, what's ahead. And when you get the slide as well, it makes sense. If you want to prep, beforehand, some students do that. You can actually see what's next in the next coming class. So, and okay, Cedric. So the reason why the other students had their computers ready was when you registered in your student portal in the course, there were videos, tutorials for you to set that up. So apparently you didn't maybe watch it or whatever. I'm going to send that to you again so you can get it ready on your computer. And another thing, from your student portal, if you've got any problem whatsoever, click on 101 student support. Someone's going to get on Zoom with you. And, so you've always got that help there whenever you need any help whatsoever. So let's say, Cedric, you're trying to install Ubuntu, for example, and you're having problems, just book a 101 session to have someone to walk you through, but not just troubleshooting, just in general throughout the course. If you need someone to just walk you through certain things that Adrian or somebody else is teaching you, you always have that access, just a quick crash course to walk through concepts.
cool. Any more questions? Can you tell?
I have a question regarding the one-on-one.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, is the one-on-one 24/7, or when is the best time to request for the one-on-one?
It can be. So when you go on the one-on-one, it's going to take you to a Calendly link, and in that Calendly link, you're going to see the available times, right? Usually, you can get a time the same day or the day after, and we're doing more hiring as well. We're actually trying to hire even 2 more engineers to join the team just for student support, right? Just to have more slots for you guys to, have that support. But usually, within 24 hours, you always get support. And one of the best ways as well, from beyond your student portal, if you need instant help, the Slack channel is a really good place to be. So sometimes you get help quicker there from Slack.
Cool. Any more questions before we wrap it up?
Oh, can I have just a minute of your time after the class?
Who's that?
Is that me or Adrian?
No, Adrian.
You want my what?
A minute from your time after the class.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So if that's the case, we could end it here. And I'll see you on, was it Thursday? See you on Saturday then, on 4 p.m. So, or it's 4 p.m. Central Time. So whatever that time is.
Yeah, 4 p.m. Central Time. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Perfect.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Appreciate